This is the Olympus TG6. I have now been using this as my everyday, literally take everywhere camera for about 6 months. I've tried to record this video a few times over the past few months, and I always have the same problem where I feel like I don't do justice to just how much I really like this camera and all the reasons why in a real world setting it's such a great camera to have and why I wish everybody owned one. But at the same time, despite not hitting those really important points or driving that point home hard enough, I ramble a long time. And I think the problem is that I have a very hard time organizing my thoughts when it comes to this camera because it's kind of I wouldn't say controversial. It's a bit hard to understand. The camera is hard to understand. So, let's back up. I had heard about these tough cameras from Nikon and Pentax and Olympus. They're underwater cameras for years. They've been around for a long time. But I didn't really start paying attention to them and actually starting to think about very seriously owning one until probably around 2016 or 2017. Now, I can't remember at that time which model was actually the current model, but I do remember at the time I was shooting, my primary camera was an Olympus EM5 Mark II. Now, I've got a real soft spot for Olympus. Now, I won't say they're my favorite camera company. They're not. When it hits, they hit hard when they hit, but they also miss a lot. So I've got a soft spot for them, but I can't just have blind faith in that company for a lot of reasons. But again, to start from the beginning, I'll say that when I was probably, I don't know, 14 or 15, early teens, I had gotten into powerlifting. And I remember my dad would show up to my powerlifting meets and he would have camera and video equipment, and it was all Olympus. At that time, he had started to really invest fully in this new digital revolution, and he decided to go with Olympus. He, at that time, found that they were offering the best set of features and the best all-round cameras for the money. I mean, the Olympus cameras were really ahead of their time. They could do a lot of things that other camera manufacturers just weren't offering. Now, of course, a company like Canon or Nikon, they offered APS-C cameras, but they didn't have all the features that the Olympus cameras had. Right off the top, I can think that, for example, Olympus was shooting video before they were. They had fully articulating screens. They had all these great pro features. They had even when it came to the image quality was really uniquely beautiful because their CCD cameras were Kodak CCDs. To this day, people love the output of those cameras. If you can nail the exposure, it's beautiful rendering. So I was always very familiar with Olympus, but when I started buying my own cameras, the very first camera I ever bought was a Sony, and then I went to Fujifilm, and eventually I owned just about everything. But one of the cameras that I had never owned was I had never owned an Olympus. And I had also never bought a camera brand new. I'd always bought everything secondhand. And I decided, I'm ready to buy a brand new camera. I have the money. I can get the modern best, whatever it is. I don't have to compromise based on what's available secondhand or what's a good deal. I can just go out and buy the right thing the first time. And after thinking about it a long time and doing a lot of research, I found myself in a very similar situation as my dad had been in years before, where even though Olympus didn't have the same large sensor as some of the other manufacturers, when you looked at all of the features of their cameras, everything from tech spec type features to even just real world practicality, and build quality and just a balance of basically everything. And then the price. it seemed pretty unbeatable. And at that time, it was the EM5 Mark II was the current camera, and I also loved the retro styling, and I really, really wanted that camera. I went out, bought it brand new, first new camera I ever purchased, and I fell in love with it. I was worried that having always shot larger censored cameras before, that the micro four thirds would bother me, but it didn't. The That EM5 Mark II really it punched way above its pay grade, and it had all these, again, so many pro features, but even just cool, fun, kind of geeky features like 40 megapixel high resolution mode and stuff like that. Amazing image stabilization. That built-in image stabilization for low light was insanely good. I could get really, really slow shutter speeds on handheld photos, even with such a small, lightweight camera. Now, I'm going to intentionally stop talking about that camera because I've talked about it in many other videos, and once I start remembering that camera and thinking of all the reasons why I loved it, I have a hard time shutting up. So I'm going to skip past that and say that I fell in love with the EM5 Mark II. It became my favorite camera ever. And I had it longer than I had owned any other camera. I hung on to it for a very long time. And I had a few different lenses for it. The two that I used most often were the cheaper 9 to 18 variable aperture zoom lens. It was small and compact, but had that really wide angle, which was super usable. And my prime that I had became my favorite lens. I used, I'd say 95% of the time, was the 45 millimeter f1.8, which is a short portrait. Now that's a legendary little lens because it's small, it's lightweight, it's cheap, and it has beautiful image output. But I also liked that focal length. I discovered early on through owning a lot of lenses and experimentation that I like wide angles, 24, or the standard for me would be 35. And I like a short portrait, like an 85 millimeter, maybe up to 105, in some cases, maybe 135. But really, once you start hitting 135 millimeter, getting much past 100 millimeters, my eyes don't see that way. I don't do any sort of special photography that needs that long focal length. So for me, practically speaking, anything much past 100 isn't suitable for me. And if you go in between the wide angle of like 24 or the standard of 35 or 85, in the middle you have 50 millimeter, and that's everybody's favorite focal length, it seems. But I hate 50, which is another thing I've talked about a lot in other videos. I really don't get along well with the 50 millimeter focal length. But that 45 prime on the EM5 Mark II became my everything lens. And I even got really good and fell in love with doing street photography with that short portrait. And some of my favorite photos to this day that I've ever taken, that I still look back on the most, are from that camera. But one of the things, aside from all the tech specs and the lenses and all the stuff that I really loved about that camera and the system, one of the things that really stood out to me was, at that time, I had never owned a camera that had just straight out of camera, absolutely just jaw-dropping, gorgeous image output. Every other camera I had owned, the Rikos, the Pentax, the Nikons, the Canons, the Sonys, the Panasonics, everything else had always been good image quality, some better than others, but I found myself editing a lot. I was always in Lightroom, always editing, always trying to get the most out of the files and trying to get it to look the way I saw it in my mind. And again, some cameras needed more editing, some needed less. But with the EM5 Mark II, I was stunned at, just straight out of camera, everything was perfect. And I can't even really describe it. With certain cameras get a reputation for a certain type of image output. Sony's have traditionally been called very cold and clinical, whereas something like the 5D Classic is very warm and creamy and kind of nostalgic feeling. Certain cameras or even brands have reputations for the types of images that they produce. Now, I don't know what I can say about the type of image I was seeing out of the EM5 Mark II or out of the Olympus cameras. But with that specific camera, it just looked good. It looked right. It looked so good and so right, just so unbelievably often without me having to do anything special to get that look, that I found that for the first time ever, I was actually comfortable shooting JPEG. And mind you, I had owned Fujifilm cameras, like a lot of Fujifilm cameras beforehand. I had owned the original X Pro 1, the original X100. Had owned an XE1. I had owned the XT30. I owned that came later actually. But I over the years I've owned a ton of Fujis, and they're known for their JPEGs. And the JPEGs were nice, but mostly I didn't shoot JPEG with my Fujis. I, again, preferred to edit the files a bit. But the Olympus, right out of camera, something about the colors just seemed perfect. And I loved the image output, and I found myself shooting JPEG a lot. Now, I always had RAWs as a backup in case I needed to really recover something, but JPEG was suddenly an option. Now, I fell into this trap of thinking that, well, apparently Olympus is this hidden gem that nobody knows about, and anything from Olympus is going to have this Olympus look, these Olympus colors. And I later found from buying cheaper Olympuses like the EM10 series cameras that they don't look the same. People say they do, but they don't. I noticed immediately when I had bought one of these EM10s, I forget which mark, it was Mark II or Mark III, I don't remember, but immediately I noticed that it did not look the same as my EM5 Mark II. It was, let's say, it looked less alive. It looked just a bit more dull, and almost had kind of I know it sounds really funny to say, but it's kind of a sad look to it. It's kind of a magenta cast. Not literally like a purple cast. There wasn't anything wrong with the sensor. Just it didn't have the same wow factor as the EM5 Mark II. So I figured, well, there was something special about the EM5 Mark II, and the other ones hit and miss, who knows. But around that time, that I was probably this around 2000, late 2016, early 2017, having owned my Olympus EM5 Mark II at that point and loving the image output and starting to want to look into what else they had available, that's when I started looking seriously at these tough cameras they make. And again, I don't remember if they had the 4 or the 5, the 6. I don't know which one was current at that point. But it occurred to me that I had owned, Ricoh GRs and other point and shoot cameras before. And so many people are in the market for these small pocketable cameras specifically for either an everyday carry or because they want to do this discreet candid photography, street photography, stuff like that. And a camera like the Ricoh GR is so popular because it is truly pocketable and has such great image output, despite some of its compromises. And I've owned several of those cameras, and I really like them as well, but they do have some compromises. One of which is bad battery life and some other little things. But to me, I had this theory, this idea that, man, one of these, even though that's not what these are marketed for, these Olympus Tough cameras could be the perfect street photography or just everyday carry camera because it is small, it is pocketable, it instead of a prime, it's got a zoom with a very practical small zoom range. It's not like a bridge camera where it ends up having terrible image quality because it's a tiny little micro sensor, and it's trying to put it behind a stack of 30 different pieces of glass to achieve a ridiculous zoom range. It's not that. It's got a zoom range, but it's limited to what's useful. And the most important thing is it's tough. It's a small pocketable camera that could potentially have good image quality because it's made by Olympus, and you could take it out in any weather at any time, which to me was important because I live in Taiwan. We have typhoons here and everything else. And you could drop it, it could get wet, anything, and it'd be okay. So it actually seemed to me like, man, if somebody wanted a great or even a perfect street photography camera, one of these waterproof, drop-proof little Olympus cameras might, just for that reason, be the best bet. But I wasn't willing to spend the money on a new one to test that theory out, because I also had this nagging idea in the back of my head that, the market for these cameras at the time, it seemed to me, was marketed towards a very niche audience of adventurers and outdoorsy types of people. And it seemed like all of the design for this camera, and again, I don't know this for sure, this was the theory in my head at the time. It seemed that maybe all of the design language for this camera was all about, again, the toughness, all the built-in tech spec features. Oh, look, it has GPS. Oh, look, it has Wi-Fi. Oh, look, it has the BSI sensor, and it has this zoom range, and it has whatever, whatever, whatever. And to me, I thought, yeah, so the biggest feature is that it's waterproof and it's drop proof and it has these little tech spec geeky features, but it's still not a very expensive camera, all things considered. So where's the compromise? Where's the trade-off? And I thought, well, the trade-off is probably that the image quality isn't very good. That's probably what you're going to sacrifice. So I just never spent the money on one. I never wanted to get burned, but I had this idea that I would like to try that if I ever got to borrow one. And if you might have seen my last video, maybe you didn't, but about 6 months ago, I came across one of these for free. I actually came across a few of these, a couple of TG6s and a couple of TG5s, all along with multiple other tough cameras from Olympus and Nikon and Canon. This one is the the TG870, the Stylus 870. And it was like a godsend. This is exactly what I've been looking for years, and now I've got a hold of a box full of them. So I immediately put down my D700 that I've been carrying around, and I put everything else away, and I decided I'm going to dedicate all of my focus to just using this and putting it through its paces and seeing what I feel about it. And I thought that I would basically have my understanding and have my answer within a few days or a week or a month, and I could make a video about it and say, so this is what I found out about the Olympus TG6. But that didn't happen. I've now been carrying this with me on trips out of town, to work, family stuff, around the house. Anytime I walk out the front door, every single time without exception, I've had this camera either in my pocket or in my bag for 6 months now. And I've taken thousands of photos, which, if you've ever seen my videos before, you know is unusual for me. I'm very selective. I don't spray and pray. I wait for a moment until I see something I think is right, and I try to get that decisive moment, that right moment. I might, if it's really important, I'm worried I didn't get it, I might click a few times, but 2 or 3 shots at the most, and that's it. I just don't take very many photos. To me, it makes it easier to then decide whether it turned out well or not, and to select the keepers and to edit things down and just kind of make my life easier. So the fact that I've taken thousands of photos with this camera is a testament to a few things. First, I have found that now this is a part where it's actually difficult for me to know how to approach this and stay coherent. So bear with me here. All right, first off, just the specs that were important to me, that I was excited about. The zoom range on this camera, it does have a zoom lens, and it goes from 25 to 100. It's a very unusual zoom range. It's not 24, it's not 28, it's 25. And it doesn't go to 70 or 90 or 85 or 105. It goes to 100, 25 to 100. And I have found that, again, as I would suspect, especially with my preferences, that's a very usable, practical zoom range, and I've really enjoyed having it. It also does have some manual features. So, for example, if you look at one of these lower end, like the Stylus cameras, and this is true for a lot of point and shoot cameras and a lot of these tough cameras, is they are very much just rugged point and shoots, in the sense that, this Stylus, it has more consumer friendly features like the selfie screen, which the TG6 does not. It also has a super wide angle. It goes out to 21 millimeters at the wide end, whereas this only goes out to 25. It has a few cool little things. It has a button right here, that little red button on the front of the camera. you can use that to take photos or to record. So when you have the screen popped up on this 870 and you're looking at yourself to do a selfie or to do a video, you can actually just hit this little red record button and either take the picture or take the video. And it's really practical and cool. Now, in theory, that's awesome. And for kids and people who don't care, that is awesome. But for me, I tried this camera out and I found that unfortunately I can't live with it because, for one, it's JPEG only. It doesn't offer RAW at all. That wouldn't be so bad, except I actually don't really like the JPEG output. They're kind of soft. Colors aren't great. They're not terrible, but I don't love them. It's just little things like that. It's very much it's great for kids, and my kids actually use this a lot. My son took this to Hawaii recently, and he was jumping in the ocean with this thing, and he loved it. Whereas this gives me more pro features. One is built a bit tougher. You can actually feel that it's heavier and has better build quality. But then past that, it does shoot RAW. It also allows me to put the camera in aperture priority, so I can set my aperture and everything else. I can also quickly change with these, dials. Like, for example, this one does not have a dial on top. This one does. And that dial can either change aperture, or I can set it to change my exposure compensation very quick on the fly. All of the actual controls on this camera are easy to access. They're very intuitive, and it's all stuff that I actually use. So I always shoot it in aperture priority. I shoot JPEG plus RAW, and again, the 25 to 100 zoom range, awesome. The fact that I can shoot RAW, awesome. The fact that I can shoot aperture priority, and I have choices. It doesn't go to every single aperture. It gives you certain choices. You can do wide open at f2, which f2 is pretty fast. You can stop down to f2.8, or then it jumps straight down to f8. And in real world, that typically covers everything. Either I want it wide open, so I'm shooting f2, or it's too bright out, and the max shutter speed is f2 is 1/2000th. So the f8 is better for that if it's a really bright day. Blah blah blah. Now it also has Wi-Fi, which I've used. It works shockingly well. The Olympus app still supports it. I can transfer photos and videos and everything from this camera to my phone, no problem. I tried it on both Android and iPhone. It still works great. It's still supported. The menus are easy to figure out. Again, the controls are great. It has a 12 megapixel BSI sensor. All this stuff. And for me, one of the big things was that I discovered that it has great battery life. The way I shoot any of my cameras, this is no exception, is that I have it off all the time. I turn it on when I want to take a photo, and as soon as I'm done taking the photo, I turn it off and I put it away. And doing that, only turning it on just to take a photo and then turning it off again, like I always do with any camera, point and shoots included, I found that I could have this in my bag or in my pocket every single day for weeks, or sometimes a month or more, without having to charge the battery. As long as you're not running around with this thing just turned on all day, doing everything you can, like recording nonstop 4K video, plus Wi-Fi transfer to your phone, plus using the flash, plus all this stuff. As long as you're using it like a normal person and using common sense, the battery is insanely good. I wasn't trying to make it last. I just shot like I normally do, and I could go a month or more on a single charge. And then when it is time to charge it, I could unlock this little side latch here. Sorry, I actually just locked it by accident. There we go. And it has USB on the side, and it charges the battery in camera, and it charges it pretty fast too. So that makes my life a lot easier. I don't have to carry separate chargers or separate batteries. I could just, if I'm in the car, even if the battery's not low, if I'm in the car, I could just plug it in and charge it up a little bit, which again, most of the time I didn't have to do. But now with that stuff out of the way, I'm going to tell you what it's actually like using the camera and what I found and why I ended up taking so many photos. So the images from this camera are absolutely gorgeous. I don't know how else to say it. They're beautiful. The same type of wow factor I felt when I saw the colors and the the basically the image processing, the rendering of my EM5 Mark II. I have that same wow factor when I looked at the photos coming out of this camera. It is incredible. Now I'm not going to say it looks the same as the EM5 Mark II. Maybe it does, but the thing is I haven't had that camera for years, so I can't really compare them side by side. But it has the same internally inside. It has the same nostalgic feeling that I had with my EM5 Mark II. I love the way this thing renders images. So I found that it didn't matter what the lighting was like. It didn't matter if I was focusing close or focusing on something far away. It didn't matter what was going on. I always loved the way the images looked straight out of camera. So immediately I was able to shoot JPEG if I wanted to, and that was fine. And I loved the way the images looked. I just right out of camera, they looked perfect. So I did shoot raw as well, and I did, out of curiosity, I wanted to see, how much dynamic range do I have real world to work with. So I took a photo when I first got the camera. I took a photo of a coffee cup that was sitting between my legs as I sat in my car, and the midday sun was shining through the driver's side window of my car, and it was hitting my lap and hitting the coffee cup, and it was blowing out the coffee cup. The white top of the coffee cup just looked completely white, like a glowing orb. And of course, my legs, my knees, everything below the window line and below the steering wheel was in total shadow, and it looked black. So I took that photo in JPEG plus RAW, and of course, I tried to edit the JPEG, and there's not much you can do, no surprise. But with a RAW file, I found that I could actually drop the highlights and recover quite a bit of information from the highlights. And I could also boost the shadows. Now, it's not the same as a full frame camera, obviously. It's not the same as a modern APS-C. But I think anybody who tried this camera and they were editing RAW files would be absolutely stunned at just how much highlight and shadow recovery you have, period. I mean, the fact that this is not even a micro four thirds sensor, it's not even a 1 inch sensor. It's like a 1 over 2.3. It's a tiny little sensor, but it's nice. It's BSI, and it despite that, it captures a lot of information. So if I ever need to recover information, I could. I felt confident that I would be able to. And between the fact that this thing does have very usable dynamic range, and in modern editing software, there's all these AI things, AI noise reduction if needed, I was prepared to have to work on these files. But again, straight out of camera, the colors were perfect. The exposure was always bang on, exactly what I wanted. Typically, if the photo is a bit dark, that's actually the way it looked best. I would have darkened it in processing anyway. Even the noise, anytime I was shooting low light or I started seeing some noise, this is one of these cameras, because some cameras the noise is distracting and ugly, and some cameras it's kind of pleasing and nice looking. And I found that the noise looked very natural. It was very pleasing, so I didn't mind it. And again, because this thing is pocketable, because I was able to literally put it in my pocket every single day, and I had it with me every single day, at work, at home, out in the city, didn't matter. I always had this with me every day, no matter the weather. I didn't have to carry a bag. I didn't have to carry extra batteries. I didn't have to worry about the battery life. I didn't have to worry about which lens I was going to put on it. I didn't have to think about that stuff. It's one little camera, one little lens, always an aperture priority. I always shot RAW plus JPEG, and I just forgot about it. I would take photos and then put the camera away like I always do. Even with my DSLRs, I take photos for weeks or months at a time, and I don't look at the photos at all. Like once a month or once every 2 months, I'll actually think, oh yeah, I should probably take the photos off that card, and I'll transfer them to Lightroom and look at them. And did the same thing with this. But the difference was that because this thing is so small and it feels so comfortable in the hand and the controls are so intuitive and it's so fast and responsive and easy to use, and the images, and it has such a very usable zoom range, and the images look so perfect right out of camera. I found that I was starting to overshoot, not because I felt like I needed to, but on the opposite end, it's because I started finding that for the first time in years, I started having the feeling that I used to have when I was young, when I was in high school, and we had these disposable film cameras. Me and my buddies we would always have disposable film cameras, and we just click everything. We'd be goofing around, screwing off, and random photo, and you get it developed later, and maybe there's flash, maybe there's not, and the composition's terrible, and there's no editing. It's just it was a disposable camera, but that photo you ended up loving, and you kept it on your wall, or you kept it in your yearbook, or you kept it in a desk for years and years and years, because it was one of your favorite photos, just because of what it represented. And when we used to have house parties, one of the things we would do was we would buy a big bag full of disposable cameras, and we put them all over the house. We put them on tables, we would put them by furniture, we'd put them everywhere on the kitchen counters, and we'd have this big house party, like a Halloween party or something. And random people from around the party could pick up any random camera and take a photo of whatever they wanted. And then they'd put the camera back down. And that would happen all throughout the night. And the next morning, as we go around the house and we're cleaning up and we're doing whatever, we would collect all these cameras and we'd go and get the film developed. And flipping through those photos to see what was on those cameras was exciting and fun and hilarious. And again, we loved those photos. It had nothing to do with being professional. It had nothing to do with trying to achieve a certain look. It was just fun. It was just taking pictures to remember a moment, and you loved it and it was fun. And that's how I feel using this camera. It's always with me. It's small. It's lightweight. The battery life is great. If I do have to charge the battery, doing so is fast and convenient and easy. It has a zoom range if I need it. It has a built-in flash if I need it. It has image stabilization, actually built-in image stabilization, which works very well. It has surprisingly good dynamic range. It shoots raw. It has all this cool little stuff, and the biggest thing is that the images are beautiful. I love the way this camera renders. It makes the process of taking photos so fun and easy and enjoyable that I found myself saying, you know what? As long as I have this with me, I'm going to stop thinking like a photographer. I'm going to stop thinking about my depth of field. I'm going to stop thinking about composition and lighting and what I'll be doing in Lightroom later. I mean, for the past few years, I've really minimized my editing anyway. I typically only do what I have to with editing. Even with this, I thought, no, everything that I have is going to be straight out of camera. I'll only do, if I see a photo where I know that I absolutely need that photo, that was a perfect photo and I need to save it, but somehow the camera totally missed and I have to recover something, then okay, I'll edit it. But I think that happened maybe twice ever. This, to me, became like the modern life camera, the disposable camera. If it breaks, who cares? I'll buy another one. And I actually started looking into the new TG7 because I've enjoyed this so much. This is just such a great camera. All the photos I've shown so far, those have all been straight out of camera. Those have been maybe, 80 or 90 of my favorite photos I've taken over the past 6 months, but I've taken thousands. And even the video, I'm going to show you some sample footage here. This is all handheld with the built-in mic. Again, same thing. I have no idea what's happening with the lighting. I have no idea what's happening with the focus. I don't know. I just pointed it at myself and I started recording. Hey, let's see what happens. Walking down the street with Wyatt, testing the video function in the built-in mic. I have very low expectations, but might be the key.
Oh my God. Oh,
It tastes like America?
it's a spot. Oh my goodness. Wow. So
Amazing.
good.
Considering this isn't really supposed to be a video camera and all of the natural limitations it has, you know, it's supposed to be a tough camera, it has a small sensor, it's not marketed for video use, or really it just technically shoots 4K. It actually shoots 4K 30 at over 100 megabytes per second, and it looks pretty good, even without trying. So, although I wouldn't use this for video, it could be used for video. You know, I believe it or not, because of the way I do this channel, because of the way I do my videos, the messages I receive most often are either, hey, I watch your videos and I decided to buy this camera because of your recommendation, which I always love because typically they love the camera, which I'm always happy to hear about. But the thing I get actually asked even more than that, or told more than that, I guess, is I'm trying to decide between these two cameras. Which one should I get? Which do you recommend? And typically it's two very different cameras. It's a 5D classic, which is, you know, vintage, old school, early era DSLR, and then it's some very, very different camera. And if I don't know the person and I don't really know what they're into or their personality or what they're hoping to do with it, and they have these two very different cameras, then I don't know what to recommend. And I tell them that, like, I really don't know. It depends on what you need. I'm sorry, I can't give you a committed answer. And the reason why is because some cameras, like for example, the 5D Classic, I will probably always have mine. I really like my 5D Classic. I still have a lens on it. I still keep a battery in it. And I haven't used it lately because I've been using this, but typically I will still pick it up and use it. And I enjoy it. I like the output. But I don't blindly recommend it to everybody. I don't ever say that everybody should have or try the 5D Classic because it's an acquired taste. Some people, especially people who come from a film background, if you come from film photography and you're used to that, doing more things your own, manual exposure, manually setting your exposure triangle and estimating things and manually changing the ISO, and you don't need live view. If you come from a film background, you probably love the 5D Classic. But if you like all these modern features, the 5D Classic is not for you. Whereas on the other end, when it comes to a camera like the Nikon D3S or the Canon 6D, although those are old cameras, they actually hold up really well. Like, I think that unless you are a teenage influencer wannabe who is looking for a camera to basically do everything for you, if you're a legit photographer or an aspiring photographer and you just want a solid workhorse camera that does everything that it can do very, very well, then the D3S actually holds up remarkably well. It's one of my favorite cameras of all time. I would still happily use it today. And I would recommend it to anybody. I think anybody who used D3S today would be very happy with it. It's the same with the Canon 6D. I think the Canon 6D holds up remarkably well. Even by today's standards, it does really, really well in low light. It still has good resolution. It's still like it does so many things so well that I would not hesitate to recommend a 6D. But other cameras, again, they're acquired taste. Well, I am happy to say that this Olympus TG6 is absolutely top shelf. It's one of these cameras that I would openly recommend to anybody. Of course, if you are a professional photographer doing professional work, I'm not going to say that you should replace your full-time professional setup with this, because as a professional photographer, you know how silly that would be. So I'm not going to argue with that. That would be silly. But for everyday people, even just photographers that want something that's lighter and easier to carry, or even as just a fun little experiment, or as a travel camera, or as a street photography camera, this thing, it is so fun to use. It is so easy to use. And everything that it does really well. Like, legitimately. It's not just that it offers certain features. It actually, like the stylus TG870, it offers certain features, but in real world, again, I can't use this camera. It's cool in theory. It's terrible in practical use, unless you're, again, a kid who doesn't care. Whereas this, everything it's supposed to do, it absolutely does really, really, like, astonishingly well. And above all else, I love the image output. I mean, everything else aside, I mean, the four corners of this solid camera, right? The four pillars here that hold this thing up so high is great battery life, tough. Now, I mean, like, it's waterproof, it's drop proof. Like, I don't hesitate to take this anywhere. I could literally drop it down a mountain and be okay. So, great battery life. It's tough. I don't have to worry about it. It'll survive a typhoon or a trip to the beach. It has absolutely gorgeous image quality, straight out of camera. It's beautiful image quality, and it's small, lightweight, pocketable. What else can you say? Now, unfortunately, I don't think that a lot of people are going to buy this camera. I don't think that this video will even get very many views, because this is a very niche product. Very few people either know about this camera or they've heard of it, but they're not interested and they're not going to watch a review, especially a 45-minute review. But I'm telling you, if you've made it this far, I would I would absolutely say that if you have the opportunity to get this camera, I don't think I don't think anybody could possibly dislike it. I don't think you would regret getting the camera. Now, I feel obligated to say that, of course, if you pay way too much for it and you are expecting it to be way more than it actually is, then of course you're going to be disappointed. But as long as you don't pay $1,000 for this thing for some unknown reason, and you're not expecting it to be the same image quality as a modern full frame Hasselblad, or I'm sorry, medium format Hasselblad or full frame Sony or something, as long as you have common sense expectations, you'd be blown away. This thing is amazing. It's awesome. And at this point, I'm repeating myself as I typically do, but I got to get to bed. It's now been 6 months. I am going to Japan here in a few weeks, taking a family trip, spending New Year's in Hokkaido, and I'm going to be taking a full size camera to that on that trip. And because we're now prepping for the Japan trip, and I mean, I have to get back in the swing of using a full size camera. This is officially going back on the shelf, but it has been a fantastic 6 months, and I really, really hope that one of you have the opportunity to enjoy this camera as much as I have. But anyway, until next time, thank you for watching, and I will talk to you later. Bye.